Sega Bits presents Sega Talk, a podcast talking all things Sega! With your hosts, George and Barry.
Look, it's a giant talking egg. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the master here. So what?
Hello, and welcome to Sega Talk. What episode is it? 16? I feel...
Episode 16.
Wow, it doesn't feel like it's been 16 episodes. We've been in hiatus for like a gazillion years. A lot of people on Patreon, if you want to support us, patreon.com/SegaBits, have been asking us to bring back the show, and we've decided to do it a bi-weekly show for now. I hope you guys enjoy this kind of Sega Talk. If you guys don't know what Sega Talk is, we basically have an episode where we just talk on a podcast in audio or video form. You can watch it on YouTube, where we just talk about Sega games. And this one, we're going to talk about Shenmue. Shenmue, right? People always give me stuff, grief because I say Shenmue, but whatever. And if you guys want to support us, we also have a pre-show, which all Patreons of $5 and up get for free. And we also give all Patreons early access. So you guys get it Tuesday, everybody else gets it Thursday. And other perks, check it out. And let's talk about Shenmue, all right? I have notes right here on my phone, so we're going to start about development. So the game started as a prototype called The Old Man and the Peach Tree. From what I gathered, and I did research, and there's a lot of people that translated, kind of discussed. The first time, I guess, that I've ever heard Yu Suzuki talk about it was at GDC 2014. I've heard it before, but that's the first time I heard him just say it straight up and show concept art. Because we haven't really seen anything about this, but it's basically supposed to be kind of like a prototype. It takes place in 1950s China, and you play as a person looking for Ryu, a martial arts master, and then you run into some man, and he asks you to find him a peach, I think. And he's skipping stones, and then you find out later in the end of this that this old man is actually the master you're looking for all along. And this is kind of a plot thread that happens in the second game when you're looking for the master. And so it's an interesting little callback there that they had it, in concept. So while we're talking about development, this is going to take a lot of time in Shenmue because there's been a lot of stuff that they worked with behind the scenes. And this is one of the early prototypes, and it's still being used. And so is Virtua Fighter Rpg, which was the next step after this. But right now, it's The Old Man and the Peach Tree. What do you think about this? And do you think that Sega should have released at least footage of this, when they were promoting the 1 and 2 remasters?
I think Sega should have done a lot in terms of marketing the 1 and 2 remasters. I think I've said it before in many of our Sega news bits. They really cut out the Yu Suzuki presence and creative process, which I think was a big mistake. And I think this whole Old Man and the Peach Tree concept's really cool. It's way ahead of its time. This is something I feel like in 2019, people would be saying, oh, yeah, there's this indie game where there's an old man and a peach tree. It just won a ton of awards. You should support it on Kickstarter. And it's like, Yu Suzuki was doing that, 20 years before anyone else,
I think
really.
they were saying that it was 96. And he was probably working on it when he got the prototype of the Sega Saturn, which was probably even older than that.
Right.
So, yeah, it's a long time coming. And it also took place in 1950s China. And if you know, Shenmue takes place in 86. So he totally changed the time period from that. And I don't know why it's 1950s China that he chose, but what do you think? Do you think it's better to go in the 80s than something like the 50s?
I definitely think it is. I also think probably this was him using what he knows. So he grew up in that period, and that was for him. But I think once he started maybe working on development, he realized that his 50s was the 80s for a lot of the young people working with him. And so to really nail that realism, it's going to be hard to work with a whole team of younger developers who are like, I never grew up in the 50s. How can I replicate this? And also I think just gameplay-wise, there were a lot of things that he probably wanted to include and introduce that just didn't exist in the 50s. We're not going to see any classic Sega games to play.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he still introduced stuff that was not out at the time, and he just did it, like the Sega Saturn.
Right. And I can actually touch on that real quick.
You want to get into it?
So, I was just going to tell you this. This is actually, I'm glad you mentioned that. There's an interview in this magazine. It's called Insight Magazine, and I've been looking for it for years on eBay because of the Space Channel 5 story, but there's a Yu Suzuki interview. He actually touches on that. I know it's a little off topic, but I just wanted to cover it. They said it takes place in 1986. Why is there a Sega Saturn in Ryo's house? And Yu Suzuki says, well, that's the entertainment. The Saturn can play Space Harrier and hang on in the house. But do you remember the Master System? Well, it's impossible to play those games on it. So basically he was saying, I could have put a Master System, but then I couldn't put the arcade games in the home.
That is true.
It makes sense.
But and he could do whatever. It's a video game. I don't think a lot of us were going to give him too much grief for that. As for the 1950s, I agree with you, and I think he chose 86 through 80. I guess we got to 88 or something. How far did we get? But he chose this time because it was like the time when the inflation bubble or whatever was happening in Japan, and it's the same reason that Yakuza 0 takes place in 88, because it was like the height of it. In 86, it was the start when it was crippling. So it's kind of interesting that Ryu was like 18, growing up. And but yeah, let's move on to the Virtua Fighter RPG, which it's interesting that he talked about this, because this is the one that interests me the most, right? Because in my opinion, Virtua Fighter is one of those franchises that they give you enough story. I mean, we talked about the first game. There's a really complicated story about all these like war and like espionage and stuff, but like there's some characters in there. They have a nice basic story that could have been fleshed out through the games, and they never did it because they focus on gameplay. But they were going to make a Virtua Fighter RPG back in 1996, which is the height of the Virtua Fighter, I guess, fame in Japan. And it was supposed to be on the Virtua Fighter engine. It was going to be very similar to what became Shenmue, which, I mean, like we said, this is kind of a theme we got with these early builds. The game was going to tell the story of Akira, which is, at the time, the main character and looks a lot like our Ryu boy. And he was looking for a man that murdered his father, again, similar. And according to him, the themes in the game were going to be sadness, departure, fighting, and starting afresh. And I feel like all these four have been touched upon in Shenmue, especially even if you look at the music titles. But it was going to have 11 different chapters, exactly like Shenmue. And so all these concepts carried over to what became Shenmue. And my question to you is, do you think Sega made a good, I guess, call letting Sega AM2 start as a fresh franchise instead of trying to like use the Virtua Fighter name to maybe build a stronger brand and get it out of fighting, I guess?
That's a good question, because I could totally see Shenmue working as a Virtua Fighter spin-off. Like, I as much as I love Ryo Hazuki, like, I could see the Virtua Fighter characters who have very little character to them working if it was like a prequel to the games, or just like a story, kind of like with like Jet Set Radio, you know, where Jet Set Radio Future is just another story with these characters, but not a sequel.
Yeah.
And almost like though characters are playing like in a movie or something, like playing other roles. But I think in the end it was smart to do a new franchise. I think the fighting game audience would probably not transition over to the point where it would make it more of a success than it was.
Yeah, and it also had 11 chapters, and like, do you think that's Yu Suzuki maybe? Because if you look, I guess, at the history of Sega AM2, the only other RPG they really made was like Rent a Hero and Sword of Vermilion. They didn't have like a repertoire of single player console games, and the ones they didn't really sell that well. Their arcade games were the ones that were always selling the most. So you think it was smart to make them do a Japanese RPG, I guess, and like trying to span it 11 chapters at this time?
I've bounced between this. On one hand, I kind of feel like Yu Suzuki needs to rein it in just a little bit. Not I don't know. Like, I think 11 chapters is very ambitious, and you look where we are with 3, and he's still saying 3's not at the end, and he's still going with his 11 chapter concept. It's on one hand, I appreciate that he's sticking with his ideas. On the other hand, on the Patreon exclusive intro, I talked about Star Wars. George Lucas wanted to do 6 movies, and then he decided, or he wanted to do like a trilogy or something, and he's like, well, if I don't get to do the trilogy, at least I'll do the first movie. So that's why the Death Star appears in A New Hope and Return of the Jedi, because he kind of hit all the beats and then went back and did the actual ending. And I don't know, I just feel like Yu Suzuki should have reined it in just a little bit and been like, 11 chapters is my vision, but let's try 7.
Yeah, and that was a question I was going to say when we actually got into the actual game development. But yeah, like, we might as well just say it now. Like, before, I mean, you got to understand the time period, right? This is like, he started developing Shenmue in like 98, maybe late 97. So he only really developed it for like 2 years. It's incredible if you think about it. Because like, to me, when I was a kid back then, it just seemed like it was forever. So it only really being 2 years and doing all this new technology, it's pretty incredible. And nobody has done episodic gaming. We have that word now, right? Like we have episodes of The Walking Dead. Telltale Games, that they were, barely went out of business, but they were founded in 2005 as a company. So the whole concept of these kind of like story games that were episode by episode is kind of really, really new. And they didn't even have a name for it back then. So it was just like, it's going to be 11 games. And back then, I think we always wanted something that was like a beginning, middle, and end, right? When we bought games. And it was that concept.
Yeah. Yeah, but I like you're saying, that was a big concept at the time. I'm thinking of a few, actually. The Dreamcast, they attempted it with Floygan Brothers. Remember, that was episodic. They only did 1. And we interviewed Brian Silva, who created the initial concept for that. You should definitely listen to the interview. It's one of our lesser... It doesn't have a lot of traffic on YouTube, which is a real shame because it's a fantastic interview. No one talks to him about this game. Also, Sega themselves, Smilebit, worked on 100 Swords, which I believe was episodic as well. And then, what is it? Dot Hack, too. Remember that? Yeah. So it was a thing at the time, and it really took off in the early 2000s. But I don't know. I think it was overly ambitious.
So I just had one more question about the Virtua Fighter RPG. Then I'll get into the. We'll talk a little bit more about Shenmue. But have you seen the GDC panel where he showed the 11 chapter layout? That it was a concept art. Do you remember it? And it was like death, and like a lot of the scenes, and even the bad guy looked a lot like Shenmue, the game we know. And they had some chapters where you're like, wait, is this gonna happen in the actual game, like after 3 and stuff? So it's interesting. And what do you think about that? Like that it actually takes that we've already seen the layout for the basically 11 chapters. Sure, it's Virtua Fighter RPG, but I have a feeling that a lot of those concepts are coming back.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I don't think he throws any ideas away and reworks them. Also, 100 Swords, I was wrong. That wasn't episodic. I don't want people to correct me. But,
yeah.
I
was going to say, so since we're barely going to get into the actual Shenmue and the Saturn Shenmue, I want to talk about your first time hearing about this game. I'm not talking about like that you played it. I'm talking about when you first heard that it existed, and maybe you, because I mean, Sega had a huge marketing budget for this, probably one of the more highest marketing budgets of any game they've ever released. So there was a lot of hype, and if you didn't grow up in the moment, you probably wouldn't know. So let us know.
I would say the official Dreamcast magazine was really the first time I learned about a lot of things, and Shenmue would have been one of them. I think it was talking about like a game that was like a life simulator, not like The Sims, but like where you would go into a world where everything was happening around you, and you could observe it. I think they might have pushed things a little too far and said you will like disrupt it and change things. That never really happened. But things, everyone had their schedule, everyone did their thing. And that's how I first heard about it. And then as time went on, they were talking about Shenmue, and that was the game. And to me, that was like the reason to I bought the Dreamcast before Shenmue even was announced, but then I was like, this just like cements the fact that I bought the right console. And it was so exciting. It was really the first time for me that I owned a video game console that had a game coming out for it that I was excited for, not because I was like, oh, it's Sonic Adventure 2, but because it was like, this is going to change everything. This is not a game you've never experienced before.
Yeah, and do you remember the big old layout when they were basically, the Dreamcast magazine was like, this is the game-changing game, and then they had these like super high-res, huge photographs of the graphics. And I personally, I remember having arguments with friends online. I mean, not online, but at school. And we were talking about how there's no way this could be real time. Everybody was saying they were bull shots, and it actually came out that they were real shots. Like, I don't think anybody's disproved them. And at the time, now when you look back at the shots, you're like, this is pretty bad. But now it's like, I mean, at the time it was like, wow, this is incredible, because like the only thing we really had at the time was like the only RPG that was, I guess people were considering graphically impressive was Final Fantasy 7 and 8. And obviously this is a totally different level of interactivity. Even the actual game, even though they kind of hyped, like you said, they hyped some stuff that didn't happen, especially early on when they were doing interviews. If you go back, Yu Suzuki used to be the king of selling you Sega hardware. And I know people like Nintendo fanboys and PlayStation fanboys would go back and hate him for it, but hey, man, Sony did the same thing. It's called selling your livelihood here. And then the game finally came out, and personally to me, I didn't buy it day one, but I had a friend that did because I didn't have money. So I played it through them, and I remember their initial reaction was very disappointing. I think a lot of people, when the game came out, they expected it to be a action game. I think because they kind of, or an arcadey, like you beat 'em up type of game where it was 3D with some RPG elements, kind of like what Yakuza became. And it wasn't, and I have a feeling this because, like I said, Yu Suzuki was doing the slow burn, but I appreciated a lot of the game. When I first played it, I appreciated the graphics. I appreciated the care that went into it, the way the system worked. I thought it was all interesting. And I did not dispute people. There was not that much action in the game. I didn't dispute people. I just liked it for different reasons that they didn't like it. So, I mean, what's your thoughts on the game?
And, well, I think to kind of give an answer to why I think you liked it and this friend of yours didn't, I'm going to assume you followed the Dreamcast magazine too, and they really set you up for what to expect.
Yeah, it's true.
I remember I never was going into it for the action. I kept hearing, you can visit people's houses, you can open drawers, you can play games, like you can play mini games, and mini games were kind of a thing at the time, but not at this level. Like the fact that you could play, like we've had mini game compilations, we've had games, and we've had games with maybe like one game that's like a game within a game, but this was, you know, a whole other level. Like you take all the mini games from Shenmue and you've got yourself a Wii game, you know, like a Wii party game. But yeah, I just think Dreamcast magazine set up our expectations correctly, and they also had that trailer. Do you remember the trailer disc that came with the demo disc in November? It also had Jet Set Radio's demo too.
Yeah, I remember that, of course.
Yeah. So I think we were prepared following the marketing, and maybe that was a failure on Sega's part for marketing the game to the general public, because I do remember both for Shenmue 1 and 2, they really pushed that like kung fu martial arts action movie sort of thing, and that's not what Shenmue is.
And also the whole thing about revenge, they try to like push.
Yeah.
But yeah.
We get into that.
Yeah, we'll get into it, but let's first talk about how Yu Suzuki dropped the Virtua Fighter name and then started calling the name Guppy. Was that the code name? The first code name? And it was on Sega Saturn. It was supposed to be, it was like 30 frames per second. It's funny because they released the footage of the Sega Saturn build on the Shenmue disc on the Xbox version, Shenmue 2. And so Yu Suzuki gave more details about the demo. For what I've heard, it was going to end up, if the game, the tech demo, I think, was 8 CDs, for what I heard. Wow. So it's kind of crazy. And the Sega Saturn demo is we just seen the framework. It's basically the framework. He shows some concepts. He shows characters from 2. He shows characters from beyond 2. So it's like it was going to be a more squashed together game for what it felt like, because it felt like he had like maybe like all the way to Shenmue 4 already planned out, like, or at least 3, the framework of it.
Right.
And this kind of showed some of that. Of course, the graphics are not as great, but it's so incredible. Did you think that the Sega Saturn could do graphics like these? Because I remember the only game I ever played on Sega Saturn in 3D that I was super impressed by, where I was like, wow, this is really competing. I'm in 2 games, Knights and Virtua Fighter 2. Did you think that the Sega Saturn could do 3D graphics like this?
No, I did not think it could do it at this level. I remember a lot of the facial animations. They look funny now. You know, like they'd be like, I'm doing it on the video.
Yeah, like
but they looked awesome, you know, for the time, and just what they were able to do. I think a lot of people were like, man, if he only released that. In fact, going back to that magazine interview, they do talk about the Saturn version briefly, and it's kind of funny. They say they were like, so you made a Saturn version, you know, what did it look like? He said, yes, it was very interesting. And they said, does that mean it was no good? And he said, no, that means it was interesting.
Whatever that means in Suzuki speak, right?
You know, like you see a movie, people go, oh, how was it? It was interesting.
So the Virtua Fighter game, Shenmue on Sega Saturn never came out. We never played it. We've only seen footage of it. And it very highly edited. I really want to see more about this, but unsurprisingly, a lot of this stuff, the tech demo, especially for early days of Shenmue, it was used to basically lure third parties into the hardware, because they showed off Shenmue and it's incredible. So that was kind of like, I'm assuming that's what Shenmue was used for in this tech demo. So I don't think we're ever going to play this tech demo, sadly, but it is nice that we've seen it.
Yeah.
According to Yu Suzuki, his goal for Shenmue was to feature an open-world exploration, high-quality cinematics, quick-time events, and free battles. Like we know in the past, the Shenmue project was supposed to span 11 whole chapters, each chapter getting its own game, which they totally flipped back on. And I remember at the time when they flipped back on this in 2, where it was 3 chapters, I was for it, because in my opinion, I think... Well, we'll talk about it, but there's criticisms of this game, and I listed them here, the biggest 4 or 5 criticisms. And one of them is the middle chapter parts, and I kind of felt like they could have, broke some stuff down. But so there was and there was even a board that we've seen before where he said there might be even 16 chapters, and I think he settled down on 11, right? Yeah. Okay, just checking.
I'm doing the Always Sunny Frank No GIF face right now. I'm going, no, not 16.
During this time, the world didn't really have the concept of... Oh, yeah, I already discussed this, right? That he did 11 chapters. It was episodic gaming wasn't a thing. So Yu Suzuki also talked about the biggest main issue when it came to development, disc size, which if you play the game, it was noticeable to me just by little things that they had to reuse a lot of stuff. According to Yu Suzuki, Chapter 1, uncompressed, would have come out to 50 to 60 CD-ROMs without compression.
Wow.
And apparently he did not like compression, apparently. Even though I feel like, I don't know, doesn't his games use compression? I guess arcades no. But, so he came up with some amazing technology. One was called Magic Maze, which would automatically make forests and trees on the map. And Magic Room... unit-based compression system that they use for this game. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of these tools right now, they're on Unreal Engine 4. They're like, these tools are so mainstream now that like the idea that he had to create this from scratch while he's making a game that's never been made before, doing systems and like with high quality facial animations that he's never done before. So it's like, the team was so over its like head. It just like kind of makes my head hurt. Like, can you imagine your game coming out to 80 CD-ROMs at the time, where the GD-ROM of the Dreamcast was 1 gigabyte? So it's crazy.
Yeah, and now Shenmue 3 is using Unreal Engine 4, so it's kind of that's kind of
So
funny.
my question to you is, do you think that maybe they were too ahead of their time and they should have reeled it back if they couldn't fit it all on a disc and they're having issues? And did you notice the compression back in the olden days?
I really didn't notice the compression. I would say in this, I know, I was saying they should kind of push back on some of these grand ideas, at least with the multiple chapters. But in this case, no. I like the way it turned out. I'm not too bothered by it. I think if anything, the remaster is where they should have worked to improve some things, especially in the audio department, and they didn't. And as much as I love the remaster, it's, whatever. This isn't the remaster one, though. We're talking the original Dreamcast.
Yeah, the
one.
original.
And for what they did, I think it was amazing.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. As I noticed some compression, like some of the voices sounded really off. Like a really, I don't know, it's just really bad quality sometimes. I don't know if it was the way they recorded it, but there's a lot of games that didn't have that much voice work and had way better sound, especially like Capcom stuff at the time. I thought they did a really good job, but they also did more. I mean, Power Stone isn't that huge of a game, so let's not compare them. Shenmue was obviously met with delays. This is one of the games that back in the day, a lot of people would kind of mock Dreamcast fans that it might never come up and it would come out. I remember people telling me that, and it was vaporware. In Japan, though, people that pre-ordered the game got on the day of release when it was delayed, when it was supposed to come out. What is Shenmue? It was a free demo they got in Japan. Yeah. This is a demo we did not get over here. It's a Japanese exclusive. Have you played it? What are your thoughts about the changes?
I have.
Like, there's a lot of stuff changes in that game that didn't make it over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There, you can get down on one knee. It doesn't really do anything, but you can do that.
Yeah. If you want to,
if you
want to like salute the flag.
I believe there's a.
Sorry.
Yeah, I believe there's. I think there's a guy riding a bike, and I don't think that was in the finished one. And then the whole storyline is. But when I was doing the Dreamcast Junkyard video streams. And, I should say, too, I'm in charge of the Dreamcast Junkyard now, so, I'm just not, so, but I'm doing when I did the video streams, I would always show what's Shenmue, and I would do a whole, playthrough of it, and, it's cool, it's a little story that you never see again, and again, not to slam the remaster, but I really think that should have been included just as a little fun inclusion, and, at least have the subtitles.
Hell yeah, and it would have been cool if they actually got some of the voice actors to come back and then maybe hire people that sounded, or like reuse voices from the original game, the English ones, just like redo it again, like, just, hi Ryu, whatever. It wouldn't have been bad.
All compressed.
All compressed. They have to have the compression.
But no, it's a very cool demo.
It is.
It's very, very meta though. Lots of Japanese humor. Like it's playing off of the ad campaign at the time with the I don't remember what his job was. Was he like the marketing director or something for Sega? And he was like, his life was shit, and he would get like hit in the face with baseball bats, and his wife hated him, and all this kind of stuff.
It was very Yakuza-like humor.
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, if you're a Yakuza fan and a Shenmue fan and you haven't played this, I would say import it. It's not that expensive. I think I got mine for $15. Maybe it's a little more now.
$1,000 now.
Oh,
I don't know.
okay.
I'm just saying.
But it's worth
saying stuff.
It's worth checking out for sure.
One thing with the game, like you said, there's some stuff changes. They took out the bikes, and it kind of makes you think how much stuff you think they worked on. And I think I read somewhere that they had like a database on a spreadsheet where they had like people working on like 13,000 items at the same time, and they had like interchanged throughout like almost 200 to 300 people when they were doing this. So like even Tom has a different shirt, I think, and clothes and what's Shenmue and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like you guys had all these assets that you could have just literally like, hey, download this shirt for free on the Dreamcast, like on the Planet Web, and you could change the clothing. They never did anything with it. I'm just wondering how much assets Sega just sitting on right now that we would love to look through, right? On like concepts on clothing and stuff, because I love the clothing on Shenmue. I think that's one of the coolest things in the game. It really brought the game to life, in my opinion. Like the leather jacket, Ryu's iconic.
Right.
Nozomi's little sweater she has, skirt thing going on. Like every character has an iconic look, you know, that like you remember.
Yeah.
So that's why I wanted to see what early concepts of these characters would look like. But yeah, What's Shenmue is good. We did not get the game, obviously, like you said, in the West. But so you think the game would have done better if we had our own version of What's Shenmue, starting like who was the CEO? God,
Was it Bernie Stoller?
No, it was the one
was
after
it?
him. The guy that went to EA. What's his name? Peter. Whoever his name is. You should have just had him on there. He went to EA, and then he went on Xbox. So, yeah, why not have him?
Peter Moore.
There you go. Why not have him?
Yeah.
Just be the guy that's like, oh, my wife hates me. My football team is losing. You know, have some American humor. It would have been a nice little tech demo. I mean, they put so much money into the marketing of this game that, I mean, it would have just made sense, in my opinion, to have something for us here in the West.
Why not pull a Panzer Dragoon Saga like they did with Europe and just release Disc 1 as a demo?
We didn't really get a demo when this game came out in the West, remember?
No, but just imagine if during the localization process, as soon as the work on Disc 1 was done, they released that as a demo disc, like with a magazine, months in advance. So you get to play the first disc of the game.
That would be pretty awesome, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm thinking about it right now. Imagine being a kid, dude, and you're like, hey, if you get this $5 magazine, you could have played early. I would have shit my pants, dude, to be honest with you. Like, out of excitement.
And then at the end, it's like your save file will carry over. You know?
that would have been brilliant. Yeah.
Because I think something at the end of Disc 2, Disc 1, doesn't he go to the harbor? Like, that's a pretty big deal.
That is a pretty big deal. And it really, like, would make you want to go buy the game. So let's get right into the story, which a lot of people that like this game, they really get attached to the story, right? So the start of Shenmue 1 starts on November 29th, 1986. Very, very punctual here. And obviously, Ryu Hazuki sees the death of his father on the hands of Lan Di, who is looking for the Dragon Mirror. He obviously, like a coward, threatens Ryu's life so he can get what he wants. And they kind of flash forward after this part. So, I mean, I think the beginning of this game is probably its strongest point. Like, the way it was directed when he's running down going up to his house, the rain, the way that the camera was shot. I've never seen that in a game before. So to me, it was pretty incredible. What do you think about the opening and the way it's set up the story?
Oh, well, I mean, I definitely think it's one of the top 10 greatest video game intros. Like, it's so iconic. You know, but maybe like, what was it? Double Dragon punching the girl in the stomach and carrying her away. You know, like something like that. That's iconic. This is iconic. I should point out, November 29th is Ryo Hazuki's birthday. They never touch on it, but this happened on his birthday.
That's even worse, dude. Can you imagine? Like, I mean, my birthday was maybe a week ago. It was on the 9th.
Yeah.
So, like, I had a pretty birthday, but, like, my father didn't die. He didn't get killed. So I would say it's pretty good compared to Ryu.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Well, late,
but November 28th is my birthday, so I would have been 2 years old when Ryo's dad was murdered. But so it's kind of funny because I feel like they must have put that in later on, like Yu Suzuki chose that as his birthday, but that would have been an interesting like little side story.
And one of
people are like,
oh, sorry, you go on.
No,
I was going to say, one of my pet peeves of the Shenmue is that, like, right when he dies, there's a time skip. I forgot how long the time skip is, but we don't. And this is something he talked about in an interview. Yu Suzuki said he was really influenced by this 1984 movie. I forgot, it's like Jungo or something like that. It's a kind of comedy about funerals in Japan, and I think it was one of the first films in Japan to touch on the taboo subject of funerals and death. And he says he was really into it, but, like, he kind of failed to show what was important in that film. And it was, like, tradition, right? And so when he dies, you get flash forward and you don't see the funeral. You don't see the cops. Like, what would the cops say about this, right? Like, that always picked, like, when I was a little kid, I was like, no cops showed up. Like, what's happening here? Like, it's just like a
Yeah.
time skip. Like, I don't understand. I wonder why that happened. I always want to. No interviewer has ever asked you this. Why?
That's kind of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man too, isn't it? Like Uncle Ben gets killed and then there's a time skip.
Yeah, and
It's not that much, but it's a few weeks, and then you just see him here being like, "Oh."
so
That's Aunt May.
that's a pretty good impression of Aunt May.
Actually, and Aunt May's kind of like Ine-san, so it is kind of like a Spider-Man situation.
Yeah. And what's your opinion on
Yeah.
the time skip? You think you didn't really need to see the unnecessary?
I think it would have been cool because I know they did the flashbacks with Rio and his dad as when he was a kid. I think it would have been cool to do some flashbacks during that time of mourning.
Yeah. It would have been cool.
Yeah. I think flashbacks would have been fun. Yeah. Fun. Yeah, flashbacks to mourning your dead father would have been fun.
What do you think about the idea of maybe Yu Suzuki going back in Shenmue 3 and adding, deleted scenes that didn't happen in the first Shenmue 1 or 2?
That's a great point, actually. I never thought about Shenmue 3 actually having flashbacks to 1 and 2. That would be amazing.
So, even though Shenmue had like a pretty basic story, I would say, of revenge, a lot of the game you spend asking questions, chasing down leads. One of the things that people complain a lot about this game is that lack of finding Landy. Like, even in the end, you're not even close.
Yeah.
You never see him
Yeah.
again. So it's a lot of you basically living some mundane life in a small town in Japan, which I find interesting. But Yu Suzuki really broke the mold, and it's kind of like ballsy, right? That to have a game that doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end, and like selling it as a full price title at the time. What do you think about that? Like, this is a huge project for Sega,
Yeah.
right? Multi-million-dollar, and the first game is like playing the beginning of Final Fantasy VII, right? Right when you leave the town that you're in. Boom, now I got to pay another $50. I mean, what do you think about that he broke that mold and he's just like, I'm going to do it, I don't care.
I mean, the game he presented was a complete game. It did tell its own story. It didn't complete the full story, but I think it was satisfying in the sense that you did get through a lot of stuff. I think the Mad Angels was a big thing. Chai, even though he does, I think, come back in 3, was a big thing. Going nowhere with Nozomi was, I guess, a big thing. So I think it was satisfying, though I think when they were marketing it and saying, this is a game where you're pursuing the man who killed your father and you need to take revenge, like, that was a little disingenuous because that's maybe that's the driving force, but none of that comes to fruition,
I think a lot of the game, and I think a lot of gamers don't understand this, is he's building a world that feels real in how I guess people in Japan would have felt leaving that place. So it's like your friends are here, your family's here, you get attached to these people, you feel safe, you get, I guess, soft. And Ryu's so angry at this point that it's like he's leaving that soft life where he has cushions everywhere to go to China to meet a person, to teach him how to fight, to kill this man that murdered his father. So that's pretty interesting, and Ryo doesn't really talk about that. And a lot of his character, a lot of the Ryu character, he's very, I guess, silent. And this is something I've noticed a lot in Japanese games, right? Like even Kazuma Kiryu is one of these like very silent, brooding types where like they don't really show emotion.
Right.
Yeah, he gets angry sometimes in Yakuza, but Ryu gets angry a few times in the game, but he seems very like dead basically. And I don't know if it's the acting that in the English one that it came out like that, or if that was part of the direction of Yu Suzuki. What do you think about that?
I mean, there's this idea where if it's like a role-playing game or a full reactive eyes entertainment game, I guess, that you are the one in the role, and so a lot of the times, you create the character's name, and so maybe it's something to do with the Japanese style of game making where the main character is you, and so they don't want to put too much personality into it, so you can kind of be an extension of that character. I remember Final Fantasy X with Titus, like it was weird to have a character who was so like loud and outgoing and had his own personality that just completely clashed probably with the players. And I mean, is that a proper read of Final Fantasy X? I didn't play it too much, but from what I played, I was like, this guy is not your typical...
I would say, I guess. I mean, I think it's typical now in Square Enix stuff. But back then, I was a little weirded out too.
Yeah.
I mean, there was always... I think it's just because the jump from... see, this is the thing right now where we're talking about, right? Jumping from not having any voices to having a fully voiced JRPG, it's a huge leap. So this is what Shenmue was doing before Final Fantasy X came out. It was trying to interact with as many people as possible, and obviously there was some stuff that I could see what you mean, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you look at the history of Yu Suzuki, a lot of his characters have no characters.
Yeah.
A lot of the characters is that you have to put yourself in the character,
And
it worked out for him.
Yeah, and
for so many years.
I want to go further down that road. So yeah, you talk about Ryo being very boring, not boring, but being very quiet, being more of a listener and a question asker than real. I mean, and when he does come out of his shell and go, no, listen up, you're like, whoa, Ryo, calm down.
Yeah.
But
when he pulls a knife out on the guy.
And it's interesting because I know Shenmue gets compared to Yakuza a lot. I think they are very different games. But I will say a big similarity between the two is that you have this protagonist who is, largely what they're going to do. They're not unpredictable. And they are, I guess you could say, stoic, quiet. They're more of a listener than a talker. And on the other side of that, all the supporting characters, they're crazy. Like, you look at Shenmue and you look at Yakuza, and they're like cartoon characters, the way they act. Like, we've got, in Yakuza, we have Walking Erection. Isn't that the name of that's his name, right?
Yeah, I think
it's like a guy who is constantly having erections. And then we've got Goro Majima, and talking about Goros, we have Goro Mihashi in Shenmue, who is the craziest character I have ever seen in a video game until I think Yakuza came out, where it's like grounded, and yet this guy's like, dude, what's going on?
That's my favorite parts of the game.
Yeah.
Right? Those little cheesy characters, and like we said, the game didn't have a complicated plot. It was like, I could basically tell you the whole plot that you need to know going forward. You meet some guys that tell you there's this Chinese person that could help you in China. Yeah. You gather fare, you go over there. Yes, you fight some people, but the little moments they gave each character, like, it did give you that feeling of departure in the end of the story when it was all said and done. And it was, like he said in the beginning of Virtua Fighter, one of the things he wanted to capture was departure. There's even a song, I think, on the soundtrack called something Departure. And it really hit me because it's like, it was one of the first times where, like, you leave your village or any beginning part of a game, and you're like, I want to go back and I want to see what these people are going through. Like, I want to see what Nozomi's doing in Canada. I want to see all this stuff.
Right.
But you can't because you decided to vow your life to kill this man, so now all this is gone from you. And that was what always hit me in the game. I thought they did that really well, and I think it's because each of these characters, you got to see some of their story, and some people would call this a waste of time, but to me, it really cemented the culture that they were trying to create and the world. Like, when you rescued Nozomi, when you help Goro get that girl that he likes, little things like that, they really go a long way. So,
and, you get what you get from Shenmue what you put into it. I know some years ago we dealt with a few haters and losers on the internet who did not like Shenmue, and when we asked them why, despite the fact that they've never played it, they would watch playthroughs where the game would be misrepresented, and they would just be playing mini games. They wouldn't actually get into any of the sub stories, and they would come away from the game going, it looks pretty boring. I don't care about any of these characters. And it's like, well, you didn't talk to them. It's kind of like me telling you about my commute to work, and I'm like, it's pretty boring. There's a bunch of people I don't know. Now imagine if I talked to these people. Not that I would. That's kind of weird. But like, imagine if I talked to them, got to know them. I'd be like, there's this guy who wants to have enough kids to start a baseball team, and there's this other guy who runs a hot dog stand, and he might leave for America. So it's only as interesting as you put your interest back into it. And and I feel like Yu Suzuki was expecting a lot from players, and so I understand why Shenmue fans feel like, or maybe act like they're above more casual fans, maybe, because they feel like they've put more into it and they poured themselves into it to the point where they feel more connected than some other people, maybe.
Yeah.
And
and I think this is pretty typical with gamers, right? I think there's a lot of elitist culture. I think Shenmue has that too, right? Where you feel misunderstood and you're like, you have to like basically be more bullish about your opinion. To me, if somebody doesn't like the game, I'm like, cool, don't complain to me about the gameplay and the game you do like. And I'll even play and I'll even take suggestions from people that don't like the game, like play this game. I'll try new games. I don't care. But you want to go into the gameplay, or you have anything else to say about
I was just going to say real quick, you brought up the soundtrack, and yes, you're right. Like when you're leaving, you really miss all these people if you put, that effort into the game. And some of the titles, like the entire disc 2, it's like Departure for Hope, To Fly Vacantly Like a Hawk, Memories of Distant Days, To Continent and Sea. It's all very like moving on, getting out of there, going, flying away, so it's they're setting you up for it.
It's a theme for sure. And they also have those sweet moments where you take a picture with Nozomi and you get to keep it. Little things
That's
like
so
that
sad.
where you're like, it's so sad. And
and she looks so happy and he's just standing there.
Oh, fucking dead.
He's like,
Corey Marshall. Okay. Oh, all right. Let's have sex, Ryu. Oh, all right.
Okay.
Let's talk about the gameplay.
Okay.
The gameplay could be broken down to 3 main gameplay components. Quest mode, which is where you go and run around the open world, which is probably like 80% of the game and asking questions.
Yeah.
Quick time events, which is QTE. That's what we call it nowadays.
QE.
Which happens during cutscenes, and you have to press a series of buttons at the right time to advance the cutscenes. And this is not new for like technically, but the quick time event name was actually, I guess, conned up by AM2. So we got that. I think somebody's gonna tell me no, Dragon's Lair. Yeah, Dragon's Lair did it before, but I don't think it was called.
No, it wasn't.
Lastly, free battle, which happens when you fight against enemies. So it's 3. Which ones of these 3 did you appreciate more, like the system, and which one do you think needed more work?
I think QTE was fine where it was at. I don't think you could push it really any further than they kind of did. You compare QTE now to QTEs in Shenmue, and not much has changed. I think if anything, people actually get pissed off when you do it and it just totally ruins your entire gameplay experience. You can never go back and redo it. I think the free battles needed more work. I feel like there needed to be more of them. There aren't that many. I feel like if you were to play through Virtua Fighter from beginning to end, you probably did more fighting than in Shenmue,
Yeah, outside of the 70-man
outside
battle,
of that,
most of them were
and that's the thing. Like
basically,
you get little bits of it, and then all of a sudden they're like, fight 70 people, and that's really cool. But I kind of feel like Shenmue 2 did a lot better job of introducing ways to fight than Shenmue 1. So I think that's the case where it was a system that was really cool, but it was underutilized because they were like, keep training, and I'm like, what am I training for? No one's fighting me. Like half the guys, it's QTE. It's not a fight scene. So if anything, I think they could have done fewer QTEs and more fights.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I don't think the QTEs were that bad in the first one. I remember the second one, they got kind of really annoying, especially in the building. But in this one, I thought they kept it pretty light on them. And I agree with you. The fighting was the weakest point because there wasn't that much fighting. And I feel like Yu Suzuki did this on purpose. He didn't want to make it violent right away. I think because when you get to China, everything is like this way more crowded, more fighting, more everything.
Right.
And I feel like in this one, he wanted to keep it, I guess, until you left. So I think deep down inside, Yu Suzuki, like we saw the Saturn demo, where it was really like Shenmue 1 and 3 were one game. And I think he wanted that. But like he said, 80 discs to the uncompressed vision. Imagine if he added all these new textures from China. It would have been insane. It would have been like a 10-disc game. Yeah. That would have been crazy. But yeah. yeah, that's all we have to talk about. That 3 systems. Something I didn't list here, and a lot of people kind of consider it part of the gameplay, even though it has nothing to do with gameplay. But the weather system, which back in the day was not playable, but was a huge deal, especially for AM2, who went overboard to talk about how realistic this game was with the weather system. They even said, according to Yu Suzuki, that the team gathered 3 years of weather data from 1986 to 1989 to make sure that the weather was accurate every time you played the game. Do you think Shenmue needed a weather system to stand out, or should they have saved the money without it?
No, I think it was...
Because, I mean... Yeah, sorry,
I think it was smart to include it, because otherwise it would have either just been a weather randomizer, or it would have been one weather all the time. And I don't think it was that difficult, probably, to create different weather situations, because they don't impact the gameplay at all. But it's just a nice way to keep things looking different as you're playing.
Yeah, it really did work. But, like, the thing is, okay, so back in the olden days, the way that the weather systems would have worked when they changed things, you would wake up and it would load it, right? Yeah. And this kind of did the same thing, only that sometimes, I don't know, like, you're right. I mean, it wasn't that huge of a deal, but then, like, the sun system, it's like all these crazy techniques that, like, JRPGs don't even use today. Yeah. Like, I was playing, I mean, I guess Final Fantasy 15, but they're making a bunch of big deal about a lot of stuff that I'm like, yeah, I played this in Shenmue back in 2000.
Yeah.
Like, this is pretty cool that you're showing me a tech demo that you have a real-time weather system. And it looks better, obviously, in 15, way better, but it just shows you this game's ahead of time. I would have saved it at the time because I don't think it sold any copies to anybody. Like I told you, stuff that impressed me and you did not impress friends that I talked to, right? Like, they were more like, oh, GTA lets you kill people. This game doesn't. So I don't think they should have made it a violent game. But, again, a lot of money spent on this technology.
Was Magic Weather one of the things that they had in the Passport disc talking about it?
I think so. I think
where they're like, let me see if I can try to do it. Like, they're like, let's talk about Magic Weather. Magic Weather is going to be really great. You can go outside, and it's going to be like weather. It's going to be magical. Okay, that's all. I just wanted to do my impression for the camera of I was going back and forth and zooming into my eye. You could look at their pimples. They had earwax. That was great. Sorry.
The Passport disc was amazing. I love the way the models looked on there. I think it's a high peak AM2 art style. Like, okay, I'll talk about this after this gameplay bit, but we'll talk about it.
Okay.
Another technical breakthrough that blew a lot of gamers' minds at the time was the NPC characters having schedules.
Yeah.
They would wake up, go to work, do all this stuff. Did you notice this growing up when you first played the game, or is this something? I mean, like, we're not your typical nerds, right?
Yeah.
So is it something you noticed?
I did, because I remember sometimes they'd say, go to the bakery or something, and I'd get there, and it would be closing, and I'd see the guy leaving, and then it would be like, excuse me, come again tomorrow. Oh. And then I'd be like, but do I have to go into the bakery to ask him tomorrow? Because he's right here. So I'll try again. Excuse me, I don't have time, I'm heading home. And I'm like, all right, well, let's follow you home. And so I'd follow him home, and I'm like, oh, he lives in a little apartment. And then he'd close the door, and I'd knock, and it would be like, no one's there, you know? I guess I did notice the system of people having schedules, but I also think it kind of showed some of the flaws with the gameplay system. Because, like I said, you know, you were told to go somewhere to talk to someone, but you got there late, and they were leaving work, but they wouldn't answer your question because you were supposed to go there to talk to them. And they won't talk to you on the street, or you'll show up and there'll be some sort of event that'll suddenly happen that'll kickstart it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
That game must have been a nightmare to program. Can you imagine having all these NPCs? And I know the first game is a lot smaller, and the whole thing about the scheduling really worked well in the first game. I think it didn't work as well in China, and I think they kind of dropped it kind of altogether. I mean, some NPCs, like the shop owners, still had the NPC stuff going, But in this one, it was more like different. Like some women would come out and sweep and do their daily thing. It was something that could have been expanded on if they continued it as a franchise. And it was interesting, but like you said, there was some drawbacks where you couldn't talk to people, so now you're stuck into this loop where you had to wait. But go on.
Yeah. So, I don't know if the schedule is going to carry over to Shenmue 3, but as, again, we've discussed in Sega Newsbits videos, they will have a improved system for talking to people. So instead of having some people who just never answer your questions and go, I am busy, leave me alone. Instead, they'll be like, I'm busy, leave me alone. But then you ask again, they might be like, oh, I remember you. Why do you keep talking to me? So I think they're going to make it a little deeper, at least in that sense. So that'll be nice.
I can't wait to see that. I think they should have had maybe multiple dialogue options. But then again, this is getting more to Western RPGs. This is more what Western RPGs do. So maybe it was probably better to stick to being Japanese, especially how complex this game got. Did you know? The first Shenmue also included minigames and full-fledged Sega AM2 arcade games for gamers to pass up time in the virtual world of Shenmue. This is a feature that Yakuza has kept alive throughout the last decade. The local U arcade allowed you to play Dart 7, Neo Darts, Space Harrier, Hang On, QTE Title, and Excite QTE 2. Is that correct? And it opens at 10 a.m. Make sure you tell Yuji Nito hi when you stop by. So what do you... This is actually one of the things that I spent a lot of time doing when I played this game, was playing Space Harrier. I mean, we're Sega nerds, so to us it's like, at this time, getting a full...
Well, we're not Sega nerds. We're not Sega nerds, but...
I don't know.
Bitters.
If you're a Sega bidder, please support us at SegaBits, patreon.com/SegaBits. So basically, the arcade was a nice little place. It was cool to go into. There was some plots that forced you to go there, I guess. But right away, I was drawing. I was like, wait, what? I remember I was like, you could play the game. Like, you could just sit there and play it. That's crazy. To me, at the time, it was crazy. What was your thoughts on the games? And me, when I played them, I just wanted more the whole time. I'm like, I wish they had more. But I guess...
I loved it. I mean... Yeah, it was the first time I was able to play some of these games. I'm pretty sure when we did we've done a Space Harrier Sega Talk, and I think I brought up how Shenmue might have been the first time I played it, because when am I gonna find Space Harrier? I might have played it at an arcade, but it was just so cool to have home versions that were almost 1-to-1, and to see the cabinet. That was the big thing, and I think that's the thing. A lot of compilations miss. I think 3D Classics brings that back, because at least on the startup screen you see the machine, and they went to the effort of actually replicating being in the arcade machine. So I think that's really cool just for a preservation standpoint, because it's an extension of the game. I think a lot of Yu Suzuki's games are only best experienced when you are doing the full deluxe cabinet. I can't imagine playing some of his games now without, I've never experienced Hang On doing that, and I don't even know if the thing can hold on weight. I feel like
these are made for
those little Japanese people.
Exactly.
I can imagine me getting on, and I'm like, get ready, and it just snaps off.
It'd be good. Maybe they made some Husky American bikes, hopefully.
Maybe. I played Thunderblade, and that thing felt like it was going to break under me. It's so rickety. But I just think it's a really cool way of presenting games. And they also had some non-Sega arcade games. I did learn recently, though, that the boxing game, that's a real Sega game.
I did not know that. I thought it was just made up for the game.
I did too. But it's on Sega Retro. I think it might have had a different name. I don't think it did, though. It looks exactly the same, though. It has that guy, that painting of the guy, and you punch the 3 pads. But it's such a perfect game for a QTE game that I'm just shocked that it was real. And that's the thing. It's in Shenmue 3, and that's a Sega product. And a reason, I don't want to make this the Shenmue 3 Sega Talk, but someone noticed a Virtua Fighter character on a poster in one of the screenshots. So I think they're going to have... I don't think they're going to have classic Sega games, but I think they're going to have the rights to show some Sega stuff. So that's cool.
Yeah, and so the other aspect of Shenmue that I feel a lot of gamers don't talk about, and like you mentioned before, the game is what you put into it, and one of it was the secret cutscenes that the game had, and plot threads that were skipped over because it was just so easy to skip some of these. Some of the stuff that you could skip over, some of the extra cutscenes were if you call Nozomi every day, you get more of that. The kitten side mission thing, if you fed him, the hidden battles and QTEs, and there was a very interesting story where your friends come and visit you, Ryu's friends that you don't talk about really that much in the game. So they come.
Yeah.
And what is your opinion on AM2? Like at this time, I guess there was some systems for side missions, but now we're basically used to playing these games that are open world. And they're basically like, these are all the checklists of your side missions. Please do them all. And then they give you like a literal icon arrow, like, Crazy Taxi, to go and do your mission. And it's very hand-holding. And this one, it was like, you could do this if you want to. We're not telling you there's going to be a reward for it. And then they give you a reward. So that to me was pretty interesting way of doing this. And do you think they should have done that? Or you think it was a missed opportunity to like handhold you at this point? Because a lot of Shenmue is not handholding, right?
No. I think it was awesome that they did that, because even though they didn't do a lot of them, it made, even though each person's experience was kind of unique, like some of us wouldn't play certain mini games that much, some of us wouldn't collect as many capsule toys or any at all. I don't think you ever had to play the capsule game. So in that sense, someone might go, oh, in Shenmue when you did X, Y, and Z, and they go, oh, I didn't do that, but in the end I did go to that barber shop and talk to the guy. But when you had a few of those little cutscenes sprinkled in that you may or may not get, I think it made the experience unique to your own. And then when you were talking to people, you're like, yeah, when those bitchy girls in the alley were like chewing me out, and then I saw them later and I beat them up, they're like, wait, that never happened. And it's like, well, did you go and visit them afterwards? And it's like, no, I went to the arcade. And it's like, well. Yeah. And they're like, oh, I'll go back and do it. No, you can't. And, I like that.
And
I like
out
that.
of these like cutscenes and stuff, which one was your favorite and or memorable at least that you experienced?
I think that, like I said, the one with the bitchy girls, the ones who are like, piss off.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Oh God.
And then you put them in their place, I think, in a cutscene that you may or may not get.
Mine was going to be either the Nozomi calling thing, but then I really thought about it, and I think you and your dad, those flashbacks, I think those should have been required. A lot of them you have to find by like doing random things in the house. Like if you go under the tree, I think there's one of them, and there's that carrot one that we always quote when we talk about carrots. So it's memorable.
Yeah, and then I saw an episode of The Sopranos where Tony Soprano basically says the same thing. He's like, hey, what are you doing? Eat your carrots. There's farmers in the fields.
So like Shivyu's a lot like Sopranos. Both start with an S. Both have beautiful dads. So now we're going to talk about the budget. This is another big topic that a lot of people talk about when Shenmue gets brought up, especially during this time. Shenmue became the most expensive video game ever developed at the time, with an estimate production and marketing cost between 47 to 70 million, of course, very questionable. Though the development covered some of Shenmue 2 as well, and marketing, obviously. During the time, Sega was already losing money left and right. Did it make sense to put a large sum of money on one title, even if it's the team that we consider AM2 basically gods of developing? So you think it was smart for Sega to put all this large sum of money into one game instead of like making 8 games? No, you don't think so?
No. I mean, we always look back at the Dreamcast and even the Saturn and a lot of the decisions Sega made, and we could say, do you think it was smart that they did this? And of course, from a financial standpoint and from just from that standpoint alone, we'd be like, no. But would we change
Probably
it?
Not.
No. We like what we got. It led to Sega leaving the hardware business. I don't think, hasn't it been said that Shenmue never would have saved?
Yeah, I think it was like
Dreamcast?
Peter Moore. Yeah, we were talking about him. He did an interview.
Like, even if every Dreamcast owner bought the game, would that have helped? I think that's what. Even then, it would have been like. And that's asking a lot. Like, so many people bought a Dreamcast for, like, NFL, for Sonic. And, you know, we've talked to Sonic fans who hate Shenmue. Or they're like, why are they putting... You know, like, or vice versa. Shenmue fans are like, well, I don't like Sonic.
There's a lot of people that are very... but I agree with you. I think we don't know the impact the Shenmue had on the Dreamcast launch. We don't know the tools that they developed that made other Dreamcast developers... like, make developing games on the Dreamcast easier. That was the whole point of the Dreamcast, was to be developer friendly. And I think the one way you show developers that you have a system with power is to have a tech demo that impresses. Shenmue was that tech demo. We don't know how many Japanese developers jumped on board, like Capcom or Konami, and they put their biggest franchises on the Dreamcast because of what AM2 showed them. You gotta understand, AM2 was selling Dreamcasts. That was and getting the support for the Dreamcast. That was part of their mission with this game. So we don't know the whole thing behind the scenes. Yeah. In hindsight, probably not a great idea. As a Sega fan, I don't give a fuck. I thought it was great. I loved it. I think it was like Sega putting the middle finger to the gaming industry and saying, dude, we're going to do shit our way, and that's how it's going to be. And I like that. I like that.
Yeah. And, you know, something that I think has paid off for them. Imagine if Sega... Because, you know, Sega got a lot of flack in the third-party era for doing exactly that. You know, canning a lot of really great games, closing a lot of really great studios. And what did we get? Golden Compass, Marvel games, some really terrible sequels. So would you like to have the Sega of 2006 to 2008 in 1999, 2000? No. And I think as much as I dislike the notion of people going, oh, Sega, the Sega, when it was good, the Sega of old, Sega's dead now. I think it's great that people have that love for the company, because when the company comes back and does something that people really connect with, like the last 2 years, I think a lot of people have come back on board with Sega because they were of that Dreamcast and Shenmue generation and era, and they're starting to see it again. And they're starting to see Sega making maybe risky, smart decisions, but it's working out for them. I agree.
I think they're sticking to what used to make fans happy, just localizing Japanese stuff. I know they calm down with the Western stuff. I don't mind them doing Western stuff, but I think your priority should be bringing over high-quality Japanese games, and I think that's what they've been doing, and that's good. But the next bit is that Shenmue was marketed really, really heavy, especially in America. Like, I think a lot of people forget this, and I hate sometimes talking to some newer Shenmue fans where they're like, Sega never marketed it. And I was like, dude, you had to be alive back then, because you must have not been conscious back then, because it, like, TV Guide, I remember they made a big deal that Shenmue was on the cover of the TV Guide, and it was the first video game breaking walls doing this. TV Guide doesn't mean shit no more. But what do you think about the marketing in America? You think it worked? Because, I mean, I think it did, because it sold higher in America than it did in Japan, and it was aimed at Japanese audiences. Like...
Yeah. I you know, earlier I talked about how the marketing misrepresented the game, but by that point you've already bought the game.
Thank you.
So, and so I think the marketing was smart. Maybe it was a little disingenuous in terms of what the tone and how the game played. I think a lot of people thought they were getting a fighting RPG, more like Yakuza, and instead they were getting a neighborhood simulator with very light fighting elements. But in the end, I mean, which way would you have preferred them to promote it here? Would you rather them go, you can watch people come and go from work, you can play video games at an arcade? It's like, I can do that now. Why do I need a game to do that? But I think also it's, so, you know, you said that it sold better in America than in Japan, and I think a big reason of that is there are a lot of Americans who want to be Japanese,
or or at least interested in how life is in Japan. Yeah. I mean, there's varying ranges. I think there are people who are like, I wish I was born in Japan. I wish I was a Japanese person.
And then there are people who are like, I'm really interested in other cultures and I'd love to learn more. And I think playing this game will probably show me how Japanese people just go about their days. And and so I think it catered to a lot of those people. For me, maybe I was kind of in the middle. I was in my Japan's so cool phase, but I was also like, I was meeting a lot of people from other countries. At the time I had a lot of Somali friends, and so I was like, it was really cool to learn more about what people just do in their day-to-day lives, and it was really no different from what we do. Maybe I didn't drive a forklift, but there were some things, cultural things, that I picked up on that I thought were very interesting.
I thought it was interesting because like you never get a big budget or even really a Japanese game that takes actual place in Japan where people that aren't a character, like when you watch anime or Ghibli films, it's cool. Yeah, they do have some Japanese culture and landscapes that only occur over there. But in the end of the day, these characters aren't real Japanese people. These are fantasy characters. The same way of saying, like, I guess The Simpsons is more of American culture than actual Japanese animation would be. But it's like saying Teen Titans. Right. Oh, I know all about America. I play Teen Titans. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and I would bring up too. You mentioned Ghibli. Back in those days, in the early 2000s, in the 90s. They would localize the crazy, fantastical Ghibli movies, but they would never localize the ones that were just slice-of-life stories. Ones that come to mind, I think, are Only Yesterday. What was their one called? When Marnie Was There. These are just... and the one that actually did come over here was the one about the guy who was designing the planes. But Grave of the Fireflies, too, like all of these, either ones that were just like tragic or just like people going about their business. And I would say those probably have the most in common with Shenmue. But at the same time, the fantastical ones have nothing in common with Shenmue. So it is interesting. I feel like there was a concerted effort to restrict those things in America, not out of any like racist reason or anything, but just because people thought, why would I give a game or a movie to an American that shows something distinctly Japanese? But it's that seeing those differences and those similarities, we all feel sadness, we all feel the need for revenge, but it's interesting to see how another culture approaches that, another country.
I agree. We're going to move on to the next section. This is almost the last section. This is called Haters. This is a list of criticism of haters.
Of haters?
I'm just listing the haters.
Oh, okay.
I'm listing the haters. I can name a few. Now. Yeah. So this is stuff that people thought about the game when the game came out, magazines and stuff. This is taken from the Shenmue Wiki or something like that, the Shenmue fan Wiki. I don't know how you say that. The game's invisible walls, which limited the player's freedom and overall world of the game not being that large. The inability to progress without waiting for events and schedule times. The lack of challenge apart from the final 70-man battle and the final what's that guy's name? The Golem guy battle. Electronic Gaming Monthly wrote that that the story lags on the third disc, The Harbor. GameSpot wrote that the time you're driving forklifts and participating in the game's QTE-filled conclusion upon hours of boredom will be taken their toll on you. Game Informer criticized the game's lack of action. I'm not going to read what they wrote because it's going to piss people off, but what is your opinions on the criticism? And do you think Shenmue is one of those games where the negatives outweigh the positives?
I think a lot of these, I think you could go either way on a lot of these, and I think to not include them in Shenmue, to cut them out of Shenmue, would make Shenmue any other game, and it would take away a lot of what made Shenmue unique. I disagree that all of these things, except for maybe you were saying like barriers, like invisible walls where you couldn't progress.
A lot of games had that back then.
No, and I think it was a misstep on Yu Suzuki's behalf, because he was trying so hard to make a game that felt real, and yet you would walk and then all of a sudden he'd go and just turn around and stop, and you're like, why are you doing that? And it was very video gamey, and I think they could have found a way, maybe just block that street. You don't need to have that street there, or I think sometimes they did have a thing where it's like this road's closed for construction or something, and I think that would have been smart. But by and large, like all those things that you mentioned, I've also known people, and I'm one of those people who like a lot of those things. So, and I think just recently Kotaku posted an article, and they were trying to rewrite history as they always do, and they were like, the much hated forklift is coming back in Shenmue 3. It was like, who's hating this?
I didn't hate it. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
I did think there was some issue. Like I said, I agree with you 100% about the invisible walls. That was the first thing I remember playing the game and being a little disappointed in, when you're looking at all these streets, right, when you're going by the arcade, right, down that street, and then you're like, oh, I can cross the street of that city block, and then you go, and it's like, boom, nope, it's a visible wall, and you're like, oh, but it looks so convincing, though, to you as a player, and I think that's why it was so obvious. And other games, I think if you could tell there's an invisible wall, there's a problem, and I think other games kind of just like, oh, there is no way to get out of here. Like, they could have just done that, like you said.
Right, and I think that kind of, like, you've been to Disneyland or Disney World before? Yeah, like there's kind of this mentality there where they go out of their way to hide those sorts of things. Like there are very smart people who create an experience where you feel like there's a lot more going on than there actually is. And so I feel like maybe they could have had the environmental designer maybe think a little bit more about how to handle those sorts of situations where you couldn't walk further than where you are. I will push back against the waiting for things. I loved that. And the reason I loved that is that it taught you patience, and it taught you to go and find something else to do in the game and enjoy the mini games. And I feel like anyone who's playing Shenmue and they just want to burn through it and go from mission to mission to mission and get through the story are playing it wrong. And they are wrong to want to play it that way, because I'm sorry, but sometimes games need to teach you things, and Shenmue's teaching you to wait.
And the problem with gamers is we don't like waiting. We like the action, and we like to be gratified right away. What's your opinion on the lack of challenge? This is something that I think is a valid criticism. The first Shenmue game did not have a lack of challenge. Like they said, there's only 2 parts where you would get stuck. And it did feel like I said again in the beginning, this is like the origin story, right? They could have just called it Shenmue Chapter 1 Origins, because it really felt like an Origins movie where, like, yep, you got the battle, like Shazam or whatever that just came out, right? Oh, you do whatever, and then in the end you have your fight, and then it's then you move on to the next sequel, I guess, like the Marvel films. And that's kind of what this is. You get your story, you get your mission, you get your character building, and then you do your last fight, and you get on the boat, and you, bye.
My take on it is, like, why should games be challenging all the time? Here's the thing, like with movies, how often have you experienced a movie where you sit down and you just couldn't finish it because the movie became impossible to watch? And I'm not talking about like you hate it. Like, so many times I have played a game, I love the game, and the game makes it nearly impossible for me to finish it. And I understand that games are meant to present a challenge, but I wish a lot more games would allow me to sit down, experience it, play it, have fun, enjoy myself, but not have to hit a brick wall and feel like I need to get good. You know what I mean? Like, movies and books never do that. Movies and books aren't like you're reading the book and then they're like, chapter 4 goes, we're going to switch this into a language you can't read. Yeah. Good luck.
No, I agree with you 100%. I don't think every game needs to be super challenging. I think, like, I just wanted more fighting and more building characters and testing out moves and getting some combos in, but I never wanted people to feel frustrated playing this game. I don't think, at least at this point in the game, it should have been frustrating because you're just Ryu, right? You're just a kid fighting these like local thugs in a small town. So it kind of made sense in that point. But one more thing I was going to add, I posted this image, and right now if you're looking at the video, you could see it. But it's basically Virtua Fighter 3 next to Shenmue, and it's 3 years or 2 years apart. I think it's 96 to 99, and so 3 years apart. And it shows you the models difference on the females here. Nozomi's on the Shenmue, and people were like, "Yeah, it's impressive." Virtua Fighter fans told me that one's 60 frames per second and one's 30 frames per second. That's 100% correct, and I don't think they can be technically compared to each other. But that is a
Right.
huge difference in just the way they modeled the girl characters, or even any character. In Shenmue, in my opinion, it goes like Sega AM2 had a long history of having trouble making 3D human objects, and I feel like when they made Shenmue, it was like their best. Like that's how that studio got it to like a very good spot, in where they looked realistic, cartoony, and had their own graphical style. Virtua Fighter 2 was another one that I really like graphically on the Sega Saturn. So yeah, I think it's 3, and I know people are going to hate me on this. I thought Virtua Fighter 3 did not have the greatest character designs, and I know people are going to hate me for that, but I like the game. But yeah, that's just my opinion on that. But yeah, one's an open world RPG, basically, and the other one is a fighting game, and one's 30 frames per second, one's 60 frames per second, but still a big leap. And what's your opinion on like the leap from Sega Saturn or AM2 Model 3 arcade games to Shenmue on Dreamcast that you take to your house?
Well, I think it's an amazing leap. I mean, we could look at, to pick another title, Virtua Racing compared to Daytona USA. There wasn't a huge time span there, and it was an amazing technological leap. And, I mean, technology in general has this telescoping effect where it's like, it takes a long time to get there, and all of a sudden, as soon as innovations start happening, that span of time where things look impressive gets smaller and smaller. There are things that amazed me 5 years ago in filmmaking, and it's now antiquated. Whereas, for maybe 75 years in film, it was kind of the same practices, very small bits of innovation. And, video games, we're reaching that point now where you look at PlayStation 4, and I think you're going to look at PlayStation 5 and not see a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. But I think maybe when we go to, I think we'll push to VR, and I guess we'll see how that goes. But because that takes a lot of power, because you have to do double the frame rate just to get in 3D. That's
true. Yeah. Again, our Patreon intro, I saw the Vader Immortal VR game, and I saw the EA Jedi Fallen Order, and you could see a huge difference in the graphics. I mean, Fallen Order looked amazing. Vader Immortal looked good, but it was nowhere near. But
so
that's VR.
The last bit, now that we're going to close it up since we're running a little late here, is while Shenmue is legendary, I think me and you as fans, we've always had to enjoy it on the Dreamcast. We never had re-releases, even though as fans we've been asking Sega for them for a very long time, and they finally did it last year with Shenmue 1 and 2 remakes or remasters. I got 2 of them right here on sitting right here next to me, so I'll show them off. I got the American one and the Japanese one. And, I mean, they're the same thing. I guess the Japanese one has a cool special packaging with the soundtrack. The American one is just fine. Just play the American one. They're just 1 and 2 remastered. What do you think about this release? And were you a little disappointed like me on the extras? Like, you would think they would put a lot of love, but it felt to me like this is just a let's get it out and make money right now project.
Yeah. It's, I mean, we've discussed this before. It's a great way to experience the game. It's I think the current state it's a admirable approach to releasing it, but it wasn't, I feel like the people making it weren't, maybe they were fans, but they weren't fans. They weren't like super fans. They weren't pouring their love into it. We were speculating on the Sega Bits Discord things they could do. My big thing was they could reuse the Dreamcast VMU save file images for maybe your in-game save file, so that you would have like file 1. Would you like to pick a VMU icon? And they would all be reused there. There's tons of assets and things in the passport disc that they never carried over, and and then of course the Yu Suzuki thing, but
you could just talk about it real quick. I mean, when you bought Shenmue 1, there was a big emphasis on Yu Suzuki being producer, director, and creator of the game. So
I mean, Yu Suzuki was pushed constantly in the marketing for the game. I'm showing the Insight magazine. I mean, they interviewed him. The game had a note from him because this was a very personal project from the guy. And I just feel like the remaster completely stripped Yu Suzuki out of it. The game does not begin with the classic Yu Suzuki signature. His name's still in the credits, of course. It's not like they scrubbed him from it. But when they were promoting the game, they were never like produced and directed by Yu Suzuki of Virtua Fighter, Space Harrier, Afterburner, all these games. And instead, not to pick on the guy, he was just paid or picked to do it. But like they pushed Adam Koralik to promote it, and we kind of joke about how like they were like created, produced, and directed by Adam Koralik. No, the guy did a fine job for what he was asked to do. But I just thought it was a weird way to promote Shenmue, was to use other people disconnected from the games to promote it, and never talk about Yu Suzuki. The fact that Yu Suzuki's name was said less and shown less than some social media influencers was weird. It just didn't make sense.
I agree with you. I think that's one of the biggest lets down in the game. I don't really want to get into it, but like the remaster is fine. If you want to experience the game, I suggest you play the remaster. It's nice to play it in 1080p. The Dreamcast obviously only goes to 480p. There's some improvements in it, not too much improvements. I kind of always wanted to see a remaster and a reimagining, but like if that would happen, I would want to see the original developers back, like Yu Suzuki, and a lot of the people that designed the combat system. I would love to see expanded. You could tell that they didn't have disk space, and now we have Blu-rays, so it would be interesting to see them go back and rethink things, but we'll never get that. This is the closest we'll get to a, I guess, remake. It's a remaster, so that's it for this episode of Sega Talk. If you guys want to suggest, we don't really have one for the next 2 weeks. I mean, we're going to be back in 2 weeks. We're going to pick a game. But if you guys want to suggest a game, you guys could donate in Patreon and message us on Patreon, and we'll listen to you way more. And if you guys just want to tell us how much you liked this episode or what you didn't like about this episode, you give us feedback at segabits@gmail.com. And of course, the podcast is available to subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, Google Podcast, and they keep on switching to Google Apps, so I don't know what you're using. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys in 2 weeks on the next episode of Sega Talk. Bye.
Bye.